Hey, my name is Ethan. I'm 31. Until last summer, I was just the guy restoring his dead mother's house on a quiet cul-de-sac where nothing ever happened. Then, one evening, my married neighbor asked me, "Do you like black women?" And my answer, too honest, too gentle, cracked open a door neither of us should have touched. I can still smell the lemon polish on her banister, still hear the way her voice broke when she whispered, "We stop here," in her candlelit hallway. What happened next changed everything about how I understand love, restraint, and the dangerous mercy of wanting someone you can never have. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I still remember the exact moment everything changed between us. It was a Tuesday evening in July, and I was planing a warped board on the fence that separated our driveways. The cicadas were droning in that lazy summer way, and the air smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke from someone's backyard. I heard her screen door open, then the soft clink of ice against glass. When I looked up, she was setting a pitcher of lemonade on her porch steps, condensation already beating on the sides. "You've been at that fence all week," she said, not quite looking at me. "Wood swells in this heat," I replied, wiping sawdust from my forearm. "Your side's pulling away from the posts." She nodded like she understood, though I could tell she didn't really care about fence maintenance. Her name was Margaret. Maggie Hart. I'd learned that much from the HOA newsletters that kept appearing in my mailbox, even though I never asked for them. She was on the board, organized the annual block party, volunteered at the library. The kind of woman who had her life arranged just so. "I'm Ethan," I said, because we'd been neighbors for 3 months and had never properly introduced ourselves. "Ethan Cole." "I know." She smoothed her sundress, pale yellow, expensive looking. "Your mother's house?" The way she said it made my chest tighten. Not cruel, just careful, like she was acknowledging something fragile. "Yeah," she left it to me. "I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded and went back to the board, running the plane along the grain in long, steady strokes. The wood curled away in thin ribbons, and I could feel her watching. "Maggie," she said after a moment, "I should have introduced myself sooner." Down the street, Nina Brooks was walking with her 10-year-old son, Owen, both of them heading home from the community pool. Owen's swim goggles hung around his neck, and his hair was still damp. Nina waved as they passed. "How's the project coming along?" she called out. "Getting there," I said. Nina was maybe the only person on the block who talked to me like I belonged here. She taught fourth grade, had that easy way with people that made you want to tell her things. Her husband traveled for work, so it was usually just her and Owen during the week. "Owen's been dying to know what those tools do," she said, nodding toward my workbench. "He's welcome to look, long as he doesn't touch." Owen's face lit up. "Really?" "Owen," Nina warned, but she was smiling. From her porch across the street, Mrs. Duarte looked up from her knitting. She was retired, spent most evenings outside watching the neighborhood like it was her personal television show. Not nosy, exactly, just observant. After Nina and Owen continued on their way, the silence settled back over the cul-de-sac. Maggie was still on her steps, still watching me work. "The HOA fundraiser is next month," she said eventually, "for the new playground equipment. I saw the flyer. We could use volunteers, if you're interested." I glanced up at her. She was twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit I'd started to notice. "I'm not much for committees." "No, I suppose you wouldn't be." There was something in her tone, not judgmental, but maybe curious, like she was trying to figure out what kind of person lived in the house where Mrs. Cole used to tend her prize-winning roses. The light was fading now, that golden hour when everything looks softer around the edges. I gathered my tools and headed for the garage. "Thank you," she called after me. for fixing the fence. Haven't fixed it yet, I said, but you will. It wasn't a question. The next morning, I was on my porch with coffee at 7:10 when she came out to water her hydrangeas. We exchanged a wave over the hedge, polite, careful, the kind of greeting that acknowledged we were neighbors without promising anything more. I was reading through my notes from the night before, planning which section of trim to replace next, when Owen appeared at the edge of my driveway. "What's that one for?" he asked, pointing at my belt sander. "Smoothing rough edges," I said. "Wanna see?" He nodded eagerly, and I plugged it in, demonstrated on a scrap piece of oak. The motor hummed, and fine dust swirled in the morning light. Owen watched with the kind of intense focus only kids could manage. "Owen Brooks," Nina's voice carried across from her front steps. "Are you bothering Mr. Cole?" "It's fine," I called back. "He's not bothering anyone." She walked over, coffee mug in hand, still in her pajama pants and a faded college sweatshirt. "He's been asking about your tools all week." "Smart kid. Good to be curious." "His father would have him signed up for every sport by now," she said quietly. "But Owen likes to know how things work." Robert Hart's black SUV glided past without slowing, heading for the main road. I caught a glimpse of him through the tinted windshield, suit, cell phone pressed to his ear, already deep into his day. He didn't wave. "Thanks for being patient with him," Nina said, then headed back to get ready for work. Around 10:30, Maggie appeared in her side yard with a pair of garden shears. She moved between the flower beds like she was following a choreographed routine, deadheading roses and trimming back the lavender. Everything about her yard was precise, intentional. "Those hydrangeas could use some attention," I said over the fence. She looked up, startled. "What kind of attention?" "Pruning, and maybe some compost. Soil looks a little tired." "I wouldn't know where to start." "Happy to take a look sometime, if you want." She studied me for a long moment, shears still poised over a spent bloom. "That's thoughtful of you." "Good neighbors," I said. "Yes, good neighbors." But the way she said it made me think she was trying to convince herself of something. That evening, I was securing my tools against the approaching storm when I decided to leave something in her mailbox. Just a small card with a playlist I'd written out by hand, songs that worked well for sanding, steady rhythms that helped you find a groove. Nothing personal, just neighborly. I was testing the track on my phone, making sure I'd written down the right title when the same song started playing faintly from across the hedge. She'd found the playlist. She was listening. Our eyes met through the kitchen window, and for a moment neither of us looked away. Then, the wind picked up, rattling the loose board I hadn't finished planing, and I went inside to close the windows. The next evening was one of those perfect summer nights when the air hangs still and golden. I was adjusting the fence latch when she appeared with another pitcher of lemonade. "You're very determined," she said, settling onto her steps. "Wood doesn't fix itself." "No, I suppose it doesn't." She poured herself a glass and offered me one. The ice clinked as she handed it over, and her fingers brushed mine for just a second. Nothing intentional, just the ordinary contact of passing a drink between neighbors. We sat in comfortable quiet for a while, watching the shadows grow longer. A sprinkler hissed somewhere down the street. Mrs. Duarte's wind chimes played their familiar offbeat melody. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you like black women?" The question hung in the air between us, completely unexpected. I set down my glass, trying to figure out how to answer something that felt like it came from the middle of a conversation I hadn't been part of. "I like kindness and depth," I said finally. "That crosses color." She exhaled, a sound somewhere between surprise and relief. Not offense, but maybe shock that I'd answered so directly, so simply. "I didn't mean," she started, then stopped. "That came out wrong." "Did it?" She looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she was turning again. I don't know what I meant. The sun was setting now, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Her face was softer in this light, younger somehow. I could see why Robert Hart had married her, could imagine the woman she'd been at 25, before the careful arrangements and volunteer committees and perfect lawn care. Nina seems lovely, she said after a while. She is. And her son, he adores you. He's curious. I like that in a kid. My husband thinks children should focus on achievement, sports, competition. She took a sip of lemonade. I sometimes wonder what it would be like to just explore things because they're interesting. It's never too late, isn't it? The question felt heavier than it should have. We sat there as the streetlights began to flicker on, and I realized we'd crossed some invisible line without meaning to. This wasn't small talk about fence repair anymore. I should go, I said, standing up. Yes, she agreed, but neither of us moved right away. Finally, I gathered my tools and headed for the garage. When I looked back, she was still on her steps, staring at the fence post where tomorrow I'd continue working on the boards that kept our properties separate. The next morning, Nina and Owen stopped by while I was setting up my workstation. Owen had been pestering his mom all week about the sanding demonstration I'd promised, so I found a scrap piece of pine and showed him how to work with the grain. Not too much pressure, I said, guiding his small hands. Let the sandpaper do the work. Nina watched from my porch steps, her coffee growing cold. You're good with him. He reminds me of myself at that age, always wanting to know how things worked. Did you have someone to show you? My dad, before he left. Then my mom learned enough to keep teaching me. Across the hedge, I caught movement in Maggie's kitchen window. She was there, watching, her thumb working that wedding ring around and around. When our eyes met, she turned away first. She's watching you, Nina said quietly. Who? Don't play dumb with me, Ethan. She took a sip of coffee. Maggie Hart has been finding reasons to be in her yard every time you're working on that fence. Maybe she's interested in home improvement. Nina gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. Be careful. Of what? This neighborhood looks perfect from the outside, but people here, they notice things. And they talk. As if to prove her point, Mrs. Duarte emerged from her house with a watering can, taking her time with each potted plant on her porch. Her eyes tracked our conversation with interest. Morning, Mrs. Duarte, I called out. Morning, dear. Nice to see neighbors helping neighbors. Her smile was warm, but there was something else in her voice, a knowing quality that made me wonder exactly how much she'd noticed. After Nina and Owen left for school and work, I found a folded note tucked into my garden gloves. Hydrangeas, like gentle hands. M. I read it twice, then folded it smaller and put it in my pocket. Over the next few days, we fell into small rituals. She started leaving citrus peels by my compost bin. Apparently, she'd noticed I was, trying to build up the soil in my mother's old flower beds. I returned her garden shears freshly sharpened, and she left a plate of cookies by my mailbox. Nothing dramatic, nothing that couldn't be explained as simple neighborly courtesy. But Mrs. Duarte noticed. You two have quite the little exchange going, she said Friday afternoon, catching me as I was checking the mail. Just being helpful. Of course. Her eyes twinkled with amusement. Your mother would be pleased. She always said a good neighbor was worth their weight in gold. When Robert's SUV pulled into the driveway later that evening, he walked past Maggie without so much as touching her shoulder. She straightened their welcome mat after he passed. A small, automatic gesture that somehow looked lonely. Saturday afternoon, Owen convinced his mom to let him help with a birdhouse project I'd started. We worked on my porch while Maggie sat on her steps, keeping a careful distance but close enough to hear our conversation. Why do you make the hole that size? Owen asked. Different birds need different sized entrances. Too big, and larger birds will take over the nest. How do you know which birds you want? You don't always get to choose. You just make space and see who shows up. I was threading a particularly stubborn screw when Maggie reached over to steady my wrist. Her fingers were cool against my skin, gentle but firm. For a moment, we both froze, her hand still touching mine, my eyes on her face, the screw forgotten. Then, we pulled back at the same time, like we'd both touched something hot. Sorry, she whispered. No problem, I said, but my voice came out rougher than I intended. Owen, oblivious to the tension, kept chattering about bird migration patterns he'd learned in school. But I could feel Maggie's presence beside me like a physical weight, could smell her perfume mixing with the scent of sawdust and summer air. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The air was getting thick, heavy with the promise of rain. Storm's coming, I said. Yes, she replied. I should go inside. But she didn't move, and neither did I. The storm hit around 8 that evening. The power flickered twice, then went out completely, leaving the whole neighborhood in darkness. I was digging through my kitchen drawers for a flashlight when I heard a knock at my door. It was Maggie, holding a candle in a mason jar, looking uncertain. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, but I remembered you mentioning my loose stare earlier and with Robert out of town. She gestured helplessly at the darkness. You want me to take a look? If you don't mind, just to be safe. I grabbed my flashlight and followed her across the driveway. Her house smelled like lemon polish and vanilla candles, expensive and clean. We made our way to the staircase and I knelt down to examine the second step. Here, I said, running my hand along the board. It's pulling away from the support. Easy fix. Thank you. I was worried someone might fall. She set the candle on the hall table, and in the flickering light, her face looked softer, more real somehow. Without the careful makeup and perfect hair, she looked younger. More like the woman who left citrus peels for compost and listened to playlists meant for sanding. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. What was she like? Your mother? Stubborn, kind. She believed in fixing things instead of replacing them. I stood up, testing the loose board with my foot. She would have liked you. Why? You take care of things. Your garden, the neighborhood, Owen when he wanders over. She would have respected that. Thunder crashed overhead, closer now. The candle flame danced, casting shifting shadows on the walls. My marriage, she said quietly. It's not. Robert and I, we're like roommates who happen to share the same last name. Polite, efficient, but not. She shook her head. I can't remember the last time we had a real conversation. I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you just being polite? The question caught me off guard. In the candlelight, her eyes looked darker, more honest than I'd ever seen them. I'm sorry you're lonely, I said. I didn't say I was lonely. You didn't have to. We stood there in her hallway, close enough that I could see the pulse at her throat, could smell her shampoo. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I should have left then. Should have made some excuse about the storm, about checking on my own house. Instead, I found myself leaning slightly forward, drawn by something I couldn't name. She tilted her face up toward mine, just a fraction of an inch. Our foreheads almost touched. Almost. Then, the power came back on, sudden and bright, and we both stepped back like we'd been caught doing something wrong. I started. Yes, she said quickly. Yes, you should go. I made it to the door before turning back. She was still standing by the staircase, one hand pressed to her chest like she was trying to steady her heartbeat. Maggie, don't, she said. Please, just don't. So I didn't. I walked back to my house and sat on my porch, listening to the rain and trying to forget the way she'd looked at me in the candlelight, trying to forget how close we'd come to crossing a line that, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. But some things, once seen, can't be unseen. And the truth was, I'd seen something in her eyes that night, something that matched what I'd been trying not to feel for weeks. The storm passed, but the air still felt electric, charged with possibilities neither of us was ready to name. The morning after the storm, I made coffee and stood on my porch at 7:30 sharp. Steam curled over the hedge in the cool air, and I could hear Maggie moving around in her kitchen. When she came out to check her flower beds, I left a small package of batteries on her. Steps, the kind for flashlights and radios. Just practical, neighborly. She texted me later, just a heart emoji, nothing else. But that afternoon, Mrs. Duarte made a comment that stopped me cold. Saw some late night silhouettes on porches during the storm, she said, watering her petunias with careful precision. Nice to see neighbors checking on each other. The words landed like a stone in still water. Mrs. Duarte's smile was innocent enough, but I caught the weight behind it. In a neighborhood like this, people noticed things, they remembered them, and they talked. That evening, our song, the one from my playlist, drifted out from Maggie's kitchen window, quiet as a whisper, but I heard it. She was listening while she cooked dinner alone, and somehow that felt more intimate than anything that had happened between us in her candlelit hallway. Monday afternoon, Nina dropped Owen off for the tool lesson I'd promised. He was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing on his toes as I showed him how to countersink nails without splitting the wood. Safety first, I told him. Tools don't forgive mistakes. Safety first, he repeated solemnly, then immediately started asking about the circular saw. Not yet, buddy. Maybe when you're 12. From her porch, Maggie watched us work. Every time I looked up, our eyes would meet for a split second before she'd focus on Owen instead, her thumb working that wedding ring around and around. She was wearing a blue sundress that made her look younger, and her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail that kept catching the breeze. He's good with his hands, she said when Owen ran to show Nina what he'd learned. Gets it from his mom. She's got patience. I meant you. The way she said it made heat crawl up my neck. There was something in her voice, something that made the simple compliment feel heavier than it should have. Owen chattered to his mother about proper nail depth while I cleaned up the workspace. When Maggie's phone lit up with a text, her whole face changed. The soft expression disappeared, replaced by that careful, composed mask she wore for the neighborhood. Robert? I asked. Dinner meeting ran late. Again. She slipped the phone into her pocket. I should start getting used to it. Should you? She looked at me for a long moment, then went inside without answering. The next evening, she asked me to look at that loose stair again. Tomorrow, she said. Daylight, please. The emphasis on daylight felt pointed, like she was drawing a boundary for both of us. I agreed, keeping my voice carefully professional. Around 11? Perfect. But when she went to pack away the lemonade glasses, her movements were too precise, too controlled, like she was cataloging evidence of something that needed to be contained. That night, I drafted a text I never sent. We should slow down. I typed it, read it, deleted it, typed it again. But every time I tried to hit send, I thought about the way she'd looked at me during the storm, the way her breath had caught when our foreheads almost touched. Some conversations couldn't happen over text, and some couldn't happen at all. I rang her doorbell at exactly 11:30 the next morning. She kept the front door wide open while I worked, both of us hyper-aware of the sightlines from the street. We spoke only about practical things, the loose board, the screws that needed replacing, the angle of the support beam. Try it now, I said, standing back. She tested the step, shifting her weight from side to side. It held firm, no creaking, no give. Perfect. she said. In the quiet that followed, I became aware of how close we were standing, close enough to see the small scar on her chin, probably from childhood, close enough to notice she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. "We stop here," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a decision, made for both of us. "Yes," I said, though the word felt like swallowing glass. "We stop here." Relief and disappointment warred in her expression. She nodded once, quick and definitive, then stepped back to let me gather my tools. As I headed for the door, she set down a glass pitcher on the counter. The ice clinked softly, a sound that would follow me home and replay in my mind for hours. I didn't look back. 2 days later, Mrs. Duarte mentioned that the HOA chat was starting to mind people's porches after dark. She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather, but the message was clear. People were watching. People were talking. That afternoon, Nina cornered me while I was replacing a section of my mother's garden border. "If you care for someone," she said quietly, "be kind where no one can see." It landed as both warning and blessing. Nina had always been perceptive, but this felt like she was giving me permission for something while simultaneously telling me to be careful with it. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "To me? Yes. To others?" She shrugged. "Depends on how much they want to see." Across the street, a door cam clicked audibly as someone's car pulled into their driveway. The sound made my nerves jump. Everything felt watched now, recorded, subject to interpretation. Thursday brought a complication I hadn't expected. Robert moved a business dinner to their house. Caterers, extra lighting, valet parking signs that turned the cul-de-sac into a formal event space. Maggie texted me that afternoon. "Loose stare fine since Tuesday. Don't come over tonight." I sent back a thumbs up and meant it. The last thing either of us needed was for me to be seen anywhere near their house during a business function. From my porch that evening, I could hear laughter and conversation, the clink of wine glasses, the kind of polished small talk that Robert's colleagues probably specialized in. I went inside early, closing the blinds against the warm glow spilling from their windows. But Saturday night changed everything. I stepped onto my porch at 10:12 to bring in the tools I'd left out, and my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. HOA neighborhood thread. A screenshot from someone's door camera, time-stamped and circled in red. A grainy image of me standing on Maggie's porch from Tuesday when I'd fixed her stare in broad daylight, but the timestamp made it look like a late-night visit. The comments were already starting to bloom beneath the image. "Just noting for the record. Optics matter in a neighborhood like this." Interesting. Heat climbed my neck as I scrolled through the responses. Nothing directly accusatory, but the implication was clear. Someone was paying attention. Someone wanted others to pay attention too. Across the driveway, Maggie's porch light went dark. I turned my phone face down and went inside, but sleep didn't come easy that night. Sunday morning brought silence from Maggie's side of the hedge. No watering routine, no garden shears, no casual waves. I spent the morning fixing a gate hinge I'd purposely loosened, needing work to quiet my mind. Nina appeared around 9 with a plate of muffins. "Extra batch," she said. "Thought Owen might want some for later." But her eyes were searching my face, looking for something specific. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." "Then be better than fine. For her sake." The words hit harder than they should have. Nina knew. Maybe she'd seen the HOA thread. Maybe she'd just read the situation for what it was. Either way, she was telling me to step up or step back, but stop living in the dangerous middle ground. That evening, I found myself staring at an old scarf I'd forgotten was in my hall closet. Maggie's, left behind weeks ago after helping me sort through some of my mother's things. I'd meant to return it, but somehow it had gotten buried under winter coats and old project notes. Now, it felt like evidence of something that needed to be resolved. The next 3 days passed in a kind of suspended animation. I worked my regular jobs, came home, made dinner for one, went to bed early. Normal routine, except for the way I found myself listening for sounds from next door. Her car starting in the morning, her garden gate closing at dusk, the particular rhythm of her footsteps on the wooden porch. I started packing a box of non essential things, books I'd read, kitchen gadgets I never used, some of my mother's decorative items that felt more like obligation than memory. I told myself it was just organization, but the box ended up by the front door like I was preparing for something. Wednesday evening, I drafted another text and saved it unsent. I will move if it helps you. The words looked stark on the screen, dramatic, but also true in a way that scared me. Thursday brought Robert's loudest performance yet, a brunch for clients that required valet cones blocking half the cul-de-sac. I raked leaves aggressively in my front yard, working until my palms were raw inside the gloves. Through the crowd of business suits and tailored dresses, I caught glimpses of Maggie playing the perfect hostess. Her laugh carried across the yard, bright and polished, but when she glanced my way and saw my blistered hands, she looked away first. After the last car pulled away, a cocktail napkin drifted onto my lawn, white embossed with Robert's company logo. It felt like a flag of surrender I couldn't accept. Friday evening, Mrs. Duarte found me on my porch, staring at that napkin I'd left on my rail. "Do you believe in mercy?" she asked without preamble. "Some days." "Then practice it." She returned to her knitting, leaving me with the word practice echoing in my head. Not mercy as a feeling, but mercy as an action. Something you did, not something you felt. I went inside and retrieved the scarf from my closet. Gray clouds were building in the west, and the air smelled like rain and cut cedar. By 7, the sky had that greenish tint that promised a real storm. I walked to the shared fence and hung the scarf carefully on the post we'd both been working around for weeks. No note, no text, no explanation. Just the simple act of returning something that belonged to her. Then I went back to my porch and waited. The rain started just before midnight, gentle at first, then building to a steady rhythm against my windows. I lay in bed listening to it tap against the metal mailbox lid, thinking about the scarf hanging outside in the weather. At 2 a.m., something woke me. Not a sound exactly, but a change in the air. The kind of subtle shift that makes you check the locks and look out the windows. Maggie's porch light blinked twice. I was out of bed and on my feet before I'd fully processed what I'd seen. Through my bedroom window, I could see her silhouette on her porch, barely visible in the darkness. I pulled on jeans and stepped outside. The scarf was gone. In its place, a travel mug sat on my porch rail, still warm, with our song title written in Sharpie on the side, "The Way You Look Tonight." Across the driveway, maybe 20 feet of wet asphalt between us, Maggie stepped into view. Her hair was loose, and she was wearing a robe over what looked like pajama pants. She looked smaller in the darkness, more real. For a moment, we just stood there facing each other across the space that separated our lives. The rain had softened to a mist, and the only sound was the distant hum of the streetlight transformer. She raised one hand and mouthed a single word. "Careful." I nodded once, understanding flooding through me like relief. This wasn't the beginning of something reckless. It was acknowledgement, recognition, a quiet agreement that some doors should stay cracked, not flung open, but not sealed shut either. She disappeared back inside first, and I followed a few seconds later, carrying the warm mug and the memory of her voice, saying my name in the darkness. The next morning, I opened the mug and found cinnamon coffee still steaming in the cool air. I sat on my steps and drank it slowly, savoring the taste and the gesture behind it. Nina passed by around 8, saw the mug, saw my face, and simply nodded. No words, but something absolving in her expression, like she understood that some kindnesses were too small to be wrong and too real to be ignored. By noon, I'd made a decision. I boxed up my mother's quilts and labeled the container Keep, not because I was staying in the house forever, but because I was choosing to stay present in my own life instead of running from complicated feelings. The decision to remain wasn't the same as the decision to pursue. It was something more subtle, the choice to be a good neighbor, a steady presence, someone who could be trusted with the small intimacies of borrowed tools and returned scarves. Sunday morning brought Robert loading golf clubs into his SUV while Maggie tended to her roses. She waved goodbye to him, then turned and offered me the same gesture, same motion, completely different meaning. "Looks like good weather for yard work," she said. "Perfect day for it," I agreed. We exchanged pleasantries about weekend plans and garbage pickup schedules, the kind of ordinary conversation neighbors have across hedge lines every day. But underneath the normal words was an understanding that hadn't been there before. We could be kind to each other. We could acknowledge what existed between us without letting it consume everything else. We could practice the particular mercy of restraint. That evening, I sent myself a calendar reminder. Hydrangea pruning. Ask neighbors if they want help. It was a small thing, but it felt like a promise to stay present, to be useful, to care for the people around me without needing to possess them. Monday morning arrived with its familiar rhythm, sprinklers hissing, wind chimes playing their offbeat song, the cul-de-sac humming to life. I was taking out the trash when Maggie emerged with her recycling bin. Our eyes met across the driveway. One respectful heartbeat of contact, then I tipped two fingers in greeting. She mirrored the gesture, and something in her expression looked peaceful. Later that evening, during golden hour, I was sweeping my porch when she came out to adjust her welcome mat. The simple domesticity of the moment felt like grace, two people tending to their separate lives in the same shared space. Some doors stay cracked so the light can find you without burning the house down, I thought. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it was everything.